Channel's Week in Review. Dozens injured in violence at a prominent yeshiva, exploring the history of being black on Broadway, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The largest outbreak of violence against Jews in the past couple of weeks has been caused by other Jews. Dozens of students were injured, multiple students were allegedly stabbed, and one dean of a yeshiva was beaten in riots Sunday night at the prominent ultra-Orthodox yeshiva of Ponevezh in Jerusalem. Violence has been frequent in recent weeks there, in a battle for rabbinic succession at one of Israel's largest yeshivas that's gone on for more than a decade. In late January, one group attacked others with pepper spray and tear gas during evening prayers. Over the course of these riots, police have detained dozens of students and formally arrested several. This is just the latest hot point in what has been a violent conflict going back more than a decade. In 2008, police claimed one side had left a pipe bomb at a rabbi's doorstep, and riots have broken out sporadically. Over here in the U.S., a more civil battle to boot out a rabbi is taking place. The rabbi arrested for allegedly taking videos with spy cameras of dozens of women undressing in his synagogue's ritual bath is refusing to leave the synagogue-owned home in Georgetown, where he's lived for about 20 years. The synagogue, Kesher Israel, has announced it is suing Rabbi Barry Freundel in religious court to remove him from the premises. But someone whom Jewish communal efforts have successfully removed is the head of a United Nations panel investigating the possibility of war crimes in the Gaza war last summer. William Shabazz resigned as head of the inquiry after Israel provided evidence that he had been paid by the PLO to author a legal opinion at an earlier date. And then there's the man who was already removed from his job leading a prosecution of a cover-up of the bombing of a Jewish community center in Argentina, Alberto Nisman. New evidence reported this week that Nisman, who was found dead a few weeks ago, in his possession an arrest warrant for Argentina's president and foreign minister, claiming that they had worked to keep Iranian officials from being prosecuted in the 1994 bombing. Nisman had been found dead in his home in what law enforcement claims is a suicide, a claim many others find suspicious. Moving on, exploring the history of minorities on Broadway is a new author. Meredith Gansman has that story from an upcoming episode of Row J.
Black Broadway, a new book by Jews of Broadway author and six-time Tony Award-winning producer Stuart Lane, chronicles the African-American contribution to the American theater in the 20th century. A producer for over 50 years, Lane has lived much of the history of the American theater and the African-American contribution to the art.
I can tell from a personal point of view of having either seen the shows or actually worked with some of these people. I got to work with James Earl Jones. I've worked with Leslie Uggams. To take a section of this, the African American contribution, which has been totally ignored in terms of books or film, I thought it was an opportunity to share and make a history of it.
The theater world first opened up to African Americans during the Roaring 1920s and the Harlem Renaissance.
When you get people who are creative and people are looking for a better life for themselves. Does that sound familiar? It's like the Europeans coming over here. They're trying to get a better life for themselves. So they culturally were major contributions during that period. So you get U.B. Blake, you get Duke Ellington, you get the famous poets from that era, all concentrated in this this 1920s decade. And on top of that, you get the maturation of the American theater. We finally start developing plays that get global recognition. Eugene O'Neill writes The Emperor Jones. He writes All God's Children Got Wings. And we do a watershed musical like Showboat, which dealt with interracial relationships.
As the African American community has evolved in American society, so has their place in the American theater.
Let's say in the late 50s, when the civil rights movement really started to build up a head of steam, you get this wonderful play, Raisin in the Sun. Now, even if you see the play today, you can see that the goals and the feelings that are presented in this play are still true today. They represent my family. They represent any immigrant that came over here in terms of trying to better their lives, to do more for their children. Starting with that kind of modern day look into theater, we started evolving into the Broadway musicals. Golden Boy with Sammy Davis Jr., an amazing talent when he came to. Mr. Wonderful had been written for him as well. As you get into the late 60s, you start getting more into the Joe Papp era of rainbow casting, where all of a sudden you can cast blacks or Puerto Rican or any other ethnic group in a Shakespearean play. Eventually that evolves into shows like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where you finally get James Earl Jones, a great actor, playing Big Daddy. Never would have been thought about 30 years earlier. So this evolution has opened up creativity and given us new ideas.
And the Jewish American community and the African American community have always been allies in producing theater.
Well, there's always been a great blend of it. I mean, if you go back to Showboat, you're talking Jerome Kern, you're talking Golden Boy with Charles Strauss and Lee Adams. So definitely a relationship in terms of production and artistic working together.
To learn more about Black Broadway and Stuart Lane, tune in to the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, this week on Up Close, as we reach new stages in life, embracing who we are and who we'll become can help us achieve a greater measure of happiness. On this week's episode, we'll speak to two people embracing new ways of thinking about their respective stages in life. For Melanie Notkin, reaching her early 40s without the husband and children she'd long planned to have offered an opportunity to look at life in a different way. Speaking for millions of women in the situation, she's defined a group called the Otherhood, and we'll discuss her book of that name. But sometimes the most we can hope for with our old dreams is to get close to what we'd imagined and acknowledge that achieving something, even in a less than perfect manner, is still worthwhile. Journalism professor Ari Goldman picked up the cello on the eve of his 60th birthday, deciding to simply do the best that he could. He chronicles that experience in The Late Starters Orchestra. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Ari Goldman. A lot of people explore new things as the kids grow older, as they move on into the next stage of life. Some people get fancy cars, some people get a boat. You got a boat of an instrument, right? You bought a cello.
I figured I had been flirting with the cello my whole life. It's something that I want to do, and then I pick up and I put down and I pick up and I put down, and finally I said, I'm approaching 60. It seems like a big scary number, and I'm gonna give it one more shot in my life. And my goal was to play in public. I had played rather poorly, sometimes with amateur orchestras and sometimes with my teacher or with my son, but I wanted to do a solo thing for my 60th birthday.
Music was part of your family legacy and a large part of how you fit into your family, and it's a really touching story of how, for you in terms of your religion, in terms of your family, in terms of your day-to-day life, music was a way in and you needed to find a way back in.
I felt the cello spoke to me. It was the music of my soul. It related to me in a way that no other instrument did. And it reminded me of the chazan in shul. And I tell the story in the book about at my bar mitzvah, I had a great range. I could sing, and I sang a kalbach mimkomcha, and this great tune that's that goes 3 octaves, and I could sing it. I could go from bottom to top, hit every note. And then as I grew older, my voice changed after my bar mitzvah, and I couldn't sing anymore, but I always wanted to make that sound, and the cello makes that sound. The cello is the instrument that most approximates the human voice, and the only way for me to sing now is through my cello.
It becomes this activity for you that is about trying to be good at making music, but it's also about not trying to be good. What's going on?
Well, it's about like accepting your, it's a horrible word, but it's accepting mediocrity. I know I'm never going to be a really good cellist, but being a mediocre cellist has its pleasures. And my book is about playing the cello, but really at this stage in life, people have more time. They're a little more secure in their careers. Maybe their children are out of the house. They can fulfill ambitions that we couldn't fulfill when we were young.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, Iowa Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.